She was 7 years old and barefoot on a hospital floor that never got warm, the terrazzo holding October's cold the way stone holds rain, and her socks had gone from white to a slick gray because she had walked through weather and then sat still long enough for the wet to settle into the fibers. She is sitting with her knees tucked under a coat, 2 sizes too big, one-eyed stuffed rabbit hidden against her ribs, cardboard insoles curled like peeled bark beside her feet. No one had asked her to move. No one had told her to stay. At 4:12 on a wet Thursday in late October, the pediatric discharge corridor at Mercy General in Dayton smelled like antiseptic, damp wool and burnt coffee drifting from a vending alcove that had needed repair for 3 summers, and still flashed out of order in one corner, while the machine beside it hissed steam anyway. The lights were bright enough to flatten faces and turn every surface pale. Somewhere down the hall, an IV pump chirped in 3-note intervals. Somewhere closer, a cartwheel clicked once every rotation because the bearing was bent. Her socks left faint, dark moons on the tile when she shifted. She stopped shifting after a minute. She had placed her shoes neatly side by side against the baseboard, as if she were visiting someone's house and not a hallway where people worked around her with clipboards and badges and eyes trained at chest level. The laces were tied in careful double knots. The soles were thin and split near the toes, and the insoles she had pulled out were nothing but cut cardboard, softened by rain and the pressure of small heels. That was the detail that would remain with people later, though they did not know it yet. She had taken care with things no one else had taken care with. She was not crying. That was what made the scene hard to carry once it was seen plainly. Her face stayed still. Not blank, exactly. Just disciplined in a way children are never meant to be. She watched the automatic doors at the far end open and close with each draft from the ambulance bay. And each opening brought in a ribbon of cold air that smelled like wet asphalt and diesel and leaf mold from the sycamores lining the frontage road. She did not raise her hand when adults passed. She did not call out. In 90 minutes, people crossed that corridor in both directions with purpose sharpened by shift change and weather and the ordinary pressure of a city hospital that never got ahead of itself. 2 pediatric residents with coffee rings on their sleeves moved around her without breaking stride. A deputy in uniform carried a stack of forms and leaned one shoulder against the charting counter to sign them. A pastor wearing a visitor sticker shaped like a sunflower paused at the water fountain 5 doors down, drank, and kept walking. A cafeteria manager in plastic clogs checked inventory on her phone as she passed. A social worker with a tote bag full of case files stopped near the locked supply room, looked at the clipboard hanging there, and turned away. 38 people passed in that window. 38. Every one of them had enough information to know a child was alone, and every one of them trusted somebody else's responsibility, more than their own eyes. Rain tapped against the long strip of windows facing the service lane. First soft and then harder, an uneven drumming that made the fluorescent hum seem louder by contrast. The girl folded the rabbit's torn ear inward and kept it there under her thumb. Its cloth had once been white. Now it was the color of dishwater, one black button eye gone, stuffing firm in one leg and collapsed in the other. Hair at her temples had been combed days ago by someone careful, and then left to fray in thin loops from rain and sleep and movement. That trace of care was still visible. It had simply not been sustained. Down at the glass station, 2 nurses were finishing chart notes and medication timestamps, speaking in clipped, low voices about discharge delays and bed turnover while the printer fed out labels in short mechanical bursts. One of them looked up, then back to the monitor, then up again as if the image in the corridor did not match any category in her training. The other followed her glance, tracked the small body on the floor, and said nothing. Both resumed typing. The clock above the narcotics cabinet clicked to 4:13, then 4:14, with a second hand that jumped rather than swept. She leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes for 8 seconds, then opened them and fixed again on the doors. Even resting, she did not slump. Her back stayed straight, coat zipped to her throat, rabbit tucked inside. She looked like someone waiting in a place where waiting had rules she already understood. She asked for nothing. By 4:17, the first motorcycles rolled past Mercy General on the frontage road in a low mechanical growl that entered through concrete and glass before it fully entered through air, an undernote that made pens tremble in a cup at the desk and sent a ripple through a tray of stainless instruments left near a doorway. It was only a handful at first, 6, maybe 8, black and chrome, blurred by rain, riders in dark helmets and cut sleeves, engines tuned deeper than commuter bikes, and kept tight in spacing as they moved through the light. Heads turned. Hands paused over keyboards. At the corner diner across from the employee lot, people at the window stools began counting before they understood what they were counting, forearms resting near plates gone cold, while wipers slapped rain from windshields outside. 12 became 27 in less than 3 minutes. Then more came from the opposite direction, splitting lanes with controlled precision, not weaving, not revving for show, just arriving in measured clusters that made the street feel narrower. Leather vests darkened with water. Patches flashed and disappeared with each pass of neon reflected in puddles. Inside Mercy General, the rumor moved faster than sound. Security at the main desk picked up a phone and set it down and picked it up again, asking for an exterior check and getting a response full of static because 2 units were already tied up at another entrance. A clerk in admissions pulled the blinds halfway, then reopened them when she realized she needed line of sight to the driveway. In pediatrics, charting stopped at 3 stations at once. People watched through glass and pretended they were not watching. By 4:23, there were enough bikes circulating and staging near the diner lot that the count shifted from impression to number. 104 visible from the east windows, another stream still arriving from Gettysburg Avenue, headlights stacked in wet reflections, like a second column traveling upside down. The riders looked like the city's oldest warning made visible, tattoos climbing necks, heavy boots dark with road water, beards beaded with rain, shoulders broad under patched denim. And in that first shared glance across the station, the nurses decided what they thought they were seeing. Trouble had come to the hospital. That was the prevailing assumption, and it hardened quickly because fear always prefers familiar stories. 3 blocks south on Salem Avenue, beneath fluorescent tubes that buzzed at a pitch only some people could hear, a pawn shop owner in a green visor pressed masking tape across the corner of a laminated card and fixed it under glass. Medal of Honor. Verified. Price reduced before close. The metal caught the light with a muted blue and gold dignity that did not belong between a used clarinet and a power drill missing its battery. In the doorway stood a man with rain stippling his leather vest and silver at his temples. 52 years old, left cheek crossed by a pale, jagged scar, knuckles thickened by labor and years he did not explain. He watched the tag go up without speaking. Outside, the rumble grew, block by block, until Dayton's wet evening seemed to vibrate on its own frame. Back in the pediatric corridor, the girl kept her rabbit hidden under her coat and listened to the engines without turning her head. She did not flinch. She did not call for anyone. She sat in the center of an institution built to triage and discharge and document, and she waited in perfect silence while adults chose explanations that cost them nothing. The story could have gone the way everybody in that corridor expected, because expectation was cheaper than attention, and fear was easier to organize than care. But the truth moving toward Mercy General that wet Thursday was the opposite of what the badges and clipboards assumed. Sometimes the men people crossed streets to avoid were the only ones who moved toward a child nobody had claimed. Sometimes salvation wore wet leather, carried nicotine on the cuffs, and followed road rules with a discipline most institutions only talked about. No one at the glass station knew that yet. They only knew the windows were filling with headlights and that the 7-year-old on the floor still had not asked for water. At 4:24, Todd Lewis stepped inside McCreary Pawn and Loan and brought the weather in with him, rain sliding off his shoulders and collecting dark on the cracked linoleum by the threshold, while a bell above the door gave a tired 2-note ring and settled into silence. The shop smelled like old carpet, brass polish, and the faint electrical heat of fluorescent tubes that had been left on too many years without replacement. A rack of used guitars leaned against a locked case of hunting knives. 3 wedding bands sat under glass beside a pawned insulin pump, and a watch engraved with a retirement date from 1999. Behind the counter, Raymond McCreary smoothed the laminated price card he had just taped near the metal and looked at Todd with the practiced caution of a man who had learned to judge risk by posture before words. "You got till close," Raymond said. "After that, inventory rolls." Todd did not answer right away. He looked at the blue ribbon, its color still steady under bad light, and at the small printed line under it that read, "Verified," as if verification could make the window less shameful. He had pawned the metal 39 minutes earlier for inhalers and a copay bridge because the VA pharmacy had denied same-day respiratory refill without prior authorization, and by the time he got back with enough cash from a friend who owed him and a toolbox he sold out of his truck, Raymond had already marked it for display. The tag corner curled where the tape didn't hold. His scar pulled pale along his left cheek when he clenched his jaw. He placed folded bills on the counter, counted exact, and said, "I'm buying it back." Raymond kept his hands flat on the glass. "Cash is fine, but once it posts to the floor, I can't release it till the reversal clears at the register." Todd's stare did not move. "You already got your money." "I got policy and cameras," Raymond said. "I can put your reclaim in line. Metal stays in inventory till I process it proper." Outside, the rumble deepened and moved north, then split, then doubled back as riders took corners in controlled loops and held spacing through rain. Todd heard the pattern immediately. He had spent long years listening for structure, inside noise, first in Basra under rotor wash and mortar echo, then in county lockup where footsteps in the hall told you which guard was coming and what kind of night you were about to have. The engines outside were not chaos. They were communication. Somebody was staging. His phone, a flip model with a cracked hinge and tape over the battery cover, buzzed once against his ribs and stopped. No number displayed, just unknown, then silence again. He did not answer. Raymond printed a narrow reclaim slip, initialed it, and slid it over with the bills while the metal remained where it was. Blue ribbon under fluorescent glare, price card taped in the window facing Salem. By 4:27, the east-facing nurse station had 7 people, standing shoulder to shoulder where 2 usually charted, and none of them admitted they were counting motorcycles even as they counted. Sandra Briggs, 46, Night shift 11 years and 3 months. Left thumbnail bitten down to the quick from a habit, she restarted every flu season, set down her pen and pressed her palm against the cool glass to cut reflection. She had seen drunk fathers threaten triage nurses, seen custody exchanges turn loud in parking lots, seen promises made at discharge desks that lasted only to the elevator. She had also seen men in biker cuts bring blankets for strangers during January outages and leave before anyone could thank them. People were rarely one thing. Systems liked one thing. Systems were easier to process. Security wants all pediatric doors, badge only, a younger nurse said, reading from her phone. Sandra nodded but kept watching the child by the supply room. She's still alone. The younger nurse glanced over, then down. Social work, flag transfer. Flagged isn't a person, Sandra said. The girl adjusted the rabbit under her coat with careful fingers, tucking the torn seam inward so the stuffing would not show. She kept her shoes lined straight against the baseboard, toes out, heels touching paint that had chipped in a shape like Ohio near the floor trim. Her socks had begun to steam faintly from body heat against cold tile, and she flexed her toes once and then stilled them again. She looked toward the automatic doors each time they sighed open. Not with hope exactly, more with the accuracy of someone tracking exits. She did not look at the nurses. She did not look at the deputy finishing paperwork at the far desk. Her stillness did its own speaking, and it made adults uncomfortable because it removed the excuse that they had not heard distress. Across the hall, a wall clock stamped Mercy General Foundation clicked to 4:28 with a second hand that jerked in tiny red jumps. The pediatric discharge printer spat a strip of labels and then jammed on one edge where humidity had curled the adhesive backing. A maintenance ticket dated July 14th remained pinned to the corkboard near the vending alcove. Replace steam valve, Unit B, pending parts. The coffee machine below it continued producing burnt coffee anyway, dark and metallic on the tongue, because staff kept feeding quarters into whatever still functioned. Rainwater streaked the inside of the ambulance bay glass where someone had propped a mop that dripped into a yellow bucket marked biohazard, in black marker, gone fuzzy from bleach. Todd stepped back onto Salem Avenue with the reclaim slip folded in his wallet behind an old prison ID he never used but never threw away. Through the pawn shop window behind him, the metal still hung in place, small and unmistakable under the buzzing lights, a line item waiting for close. The street had gone from wet to reflective. Every brake light doubled in puddles, every neon sign trembling with each drop. He could smell fryer grease from the diner at the corner and diesel from an idling city bus that never shut off at that stop because the starter had failed twice last winter. He turned north toward Mercy General, boots heavy with rain, and his right knee gave its usual warning on the curb cut where concrete had sunk by 1.5 inches. 45 years of hard living had left their mark. He kept walking. He passed Street, Mark's thrift store, where a volunteer was dragging in a rack of donated coats and counting hangers out loud, past a bus shelter with an ad for legal aid peeling at the corners, past a church marquee that still carried Sunday's message in black plastic letters, though Thursday had already started to darken. At one intersection, he stopped for a red light and watched 2 riders glide through on the cross street in staggered formation, visors beaded with rain, no throttle theatrics, no wasted motion. His phone vibrated once against his chest and then went quiet again. He left it there. No speeches, no ceremony. That was the way real work began when you were still walking toward the thing that mattered. Inside Mercy General, the receptionist at Pediatric Intake was straightening clipboards by size and color, Blue forms left, yellow forms right, because order was one of the few things she could control on shift, and she guarded it hard. Her name was Colleen Hart, age 58, two grown daughters in Indiana, 22 years behind the same desk, and she had developed the kind of smile that could survive grief without inviting conversation. She saw the girl on the floor and logged the sighting at 4:32 on a sticky note she placed under a paperweight shaped like an apple. She told herself social work had it. She told herself there were channels. The note remained there, time-stamped, while the child kept waiting. The hospital intercom called respiratory to room 214, then environmental services to the surgical wing, and in the gap between announcements, the engine noise came through the walls as a low, sustained pressure that made the plastic blinds tremble against the windows. Not revving, not random. It gathered the way weather gathers over flat country, layer by layer, until even people who never listened to motorcycles could tell there was a pattern to it. Sandra looked toward the station monitor and saw exterior camera feeds filled with helmets and rain capes, bikes parked in straight lines along a legal curb, hazard lights blinking in synchronized amber. No one blocked an ambulance lane. No one touched the doors. Men stood with hands visible and faces turned toward the entrance as if waiting for instruction from somewhere inside the building that had not yet decided to speak to them. By 4:34, the smell in the corridor had changed. Antiseptic and coffee were still there, but now wet leather and cold engine metal had joined them each time the doors opened, along with a thread of November air arriving early. The girl lifted her head a fraction and listened. For the first time since she had sat down, she seemed to register that the outside had shifted in response to her existence, even if she had no language yet for what that meant. She pressed the rabbit closer and tucked both feet under her coat hem, not hiding, just conserving warmth the way children in unstable places learn to do without instruction. Todd entered through the ambulance bay side at 4:35 because he knew the camera blind spots and hated making front desks choose whether to challenge him in front of waiting families. His vest dripped onto the mat. His shoulders filled the doorway, and then narrowed as he stepped aside for a gurney coming through, one hand up in apology to the orderly, reflexes older than pride. The corridor light took years off no one and added years to everyone. He spotted the shoes first, then the cardboard insoles, then the rabbit's one remaining eye peeking from a coat zipper gap. Something in him locked to that image with the clean certainty he had trusted in worse places. He approached slowly, knees protesting as he lowered himself to her height, one boot planted, one hand resting open on his thigh where she could see it. Up close he could smell rain in her hair and cafeteria. Tomato soup dried on fabric, and beneath that the chalky odor of damp cardboard from inside her shoes. Her face stayed steady, but her eyes moved once to his scar and once to the patch on his vest, and then settled on his hands, measuring. "Please don't let them send me back in the van," she whispered. The sentence was so small it nearly disappeared under the corridor noise, yet every adult within 10 feet heard it, and went still in ways they would later remember with discomfort. Todd held her gaze and answered in the only register he had ever trusted when stakes were real. "You're not leaving alone," he said. He stood, turned, and looked down the corridor toward the payphone by radiology, chrome-worn dull where years of palms had gripped the receiver, a hand-lettered out-of-order sign taped crooked and ignored because one slot still took quarters if you hit the cradle twice. The building continued around them as if nothing had altered. Wheels squeaked, doors clicked, printers jammed, charts changed hands. Yet a line had been crossed that did not appear on any form. Todd touched the reclaim slip once through his vest, felt the paper edge against his knuckles, and started walking toward the phone while rain kept tapping at the windows, and the rumble outside kept building in disciplined, patient layers. Todd crossed the corridor with the gait of a man whose body had collected invoices for every year it survived. Right knee stiff on the downslope, lower back catching once near the radiology doors, then loosening as if habit had oiled the hinge. The payphone sat in an alcove between a faded hand sanitizer poster and a vending machine that blinked credit only, though the card reader had been dead since spring. The chrome around the receiver had gone dull from decades of hospital palms, and someone had written "Call desk first" in blue marker on a strip of tape that had started to peel at one corner. He set 2 quarters on the shelf, flattened them with his thumb, then looked back down the hallway where the girl sat with her rabbit pressed beneath her coat, still and small beneath fluorescent light that made every other person look temporary. He had spent most of his adult life in places where people learned to classify one another quickly because hesitation could carry a price, and those classifications had followed him into civilian rooms long after the uniform stopped fitting his shoulders. In Basra, in 1991, the heat had rolled off concrete like a second atmosphere, and he had learned to read alley mouths, roof lines, the way silence changed when danger moved. In Montgomery County lockup 15 years later, he had learned a different discipline. Never turn your back to a dayroom crowd. Never owe, never ask for favors you could not repay by sunrise. Between those 2 worlds he had married, worked construction, lost work when his lungs started tightening in winter, and watched a bar fight spin past the point where fists become consequences. The man who fell had hit a curb wrong. Todd served 2 years and came out with a scar in his record that moved ahead of him into every hiring conversation, every apartment application, every polite refusal that used the word policy as if policy were weather. By 4:37, rain had thickened against the ambulance bay glass, each drop striking hard enough to flatten and run in clear rivulets that caught the corridor lights. The engine noise outside held steady in a low mechanical line, not showy, not frantic, just present. Todd heard spacing in it the way other men heard music. It reminded him of convoy nights when headlights were hooded and distance was measured by trust. He picked up the receiver and pressed the cradle once, twice, listening for tone. Static first, then a thin dial hum. His left hand flexed, knuckles swelling pale around old fractures. Those hands had poured concrete, wired breaker panels, carried drywall upstairs 2 sheets at a time, and once held his son's bicycle seat for 4 blocks on a summer evening in 2004, until the boy shouted that he could do it, and Todd let go without warning, because that was the only way balance was learned. The boy's name was Aaron, 29 now. Last answered a text in May of 2018 with 2 words, "Busy lately," and then the line went cold except for holiday messages that stayed unread. Todd still paid the number every month. He kept it active the way some men kept porch lights on for people who might return. Divorce papers had arrived by certified mail while he was working nights at a warehouse off Interstate 70, and the envelope sat unopened on his kitchen table for 3 days because he already knew what was inside by the way his landlord said his name. Colleen Hart moved through the alcove carrying a stack of clipped discharge packets and slowed when she saw him at the phone. She recognized him from intake, from the damp vest, from the face that looked carved rather than aged. "Sir," she said, "that line drops if you don't speak right away." Her tone was procedural, not unkind. He nodded once. "I'll speak fast." She looked past him toward the child, then back to her packets. Her mouth tightened at one corner, the expression of somebody recalculating what counted as her lane. Pediatric social worker is in conference, she said. They're reviewing transport. Todd did not ask which transport. He already knew. I heard. Colleen stood there for one breath longer than needed, then shifted the files against her hip and continued down the hall, sensible shoes whispering over wet tile. He watched her go, then fed the first quarter into the slot. It stuck halfway. He rapped the metal faceplate with his knuckle, firm but controlled, and the coin dropped with a hollow clink that seemed too loud in the alcove. 5 decades of hard living had left their mark in visible and hidden ways. The visible marks were easy: the scar on his left cheek from shrapnel, the faded black ink on his forearm where a platoon number had blurred into blue haze, the flattening of his nose from a county jail bunk fight he never discussed. The hidden marks sat deeper. A habit of counting doors in every room, the reflex to stand with his back near walls, the instinct to move toward trouble if children were inside the radius. He had never called that instinct noble. It felt closer to debt. At 4:38, Sandra Briggs came out from the nurse station holding a thermal blanket, still folded in factory creases, and stopped a few feet from him. Up close, she smelled like hand sanitizer and peppermint gum, gone stale after a long shift. She won't take this from staff, Sandra said quietly. Maybe she'll take it from you. Todd glanced at the blanket, then at the girl. She asked for one? Sandra shook her head. She asked for nothing. The words landed flat, heavier than complaint. Do you know her? No. Are you family? No. Sandra watched him for a long second, then looked through the glass toward the parking lanes lined with idling bikes. Her face held no panic now, only concentration, sharpened by fatigue. If you're making a call, she said, make it now. Intake says van transfer at 5:10 unless someone intervenes. He took the blanket and tucked it beneath his arm. I'm making it. She gave one small nod and returned to the station. He fed the second quarter. This one dropped clean. He dialed from memory, each number pressed hard enough to click twice in the worn keypad. The club had not saved him from himself, and he never pretended it had. What it gave him was structure after his release, when structure had been the only thing standing between him and a return trip to cells that smelled of bleach and old rage. Tuesday meetings, Saturday runs, mandatory sobriety on duty, a rule that every vote counted, including the quiet men in back. Another rule, unwritten but observed, that when a child was left exposed by adults, personal history went silent and logistics took over. He had watched that rule hold in snowstorms, at custody hearings, outside shelters where nobody wanted leather vests by the door until the doors needed guarding. He trusted men he would not have trusted with his wallet 20 years earlier because he had seen what they did when it cost sleep, money, or reputation. The line rang 3 times. A click, then a voice roughened by cigarettes and winter riding. Mace. Todd kept his own low. It's Lewis. A pause just long enough to mark recognition. Location. Mercy General, pediatric discharge corridor. Child placement transfer pending. Time. 5:10 van, maybe earlier. Need? Witness wall. Legal, clean, hospital, and intake both. Another pause, papers moving on the far end. Maybe a door shutting. Anything else? Todd looked through the alcove opening toward Salem Avenue in his mind, seeing the fluorescent pawn window and the blue ribbon hung under a reduced price tag. McCreary pawn and loan buyback cleared. Metals off the window and secured. Close at 6. Mace did not comment on pride or shame. Copy. Stay on site. The line went dead. No promises, no speeches. Todd hung up and set the receiver back with care, as if careful handling might keep the circuit open for whatever came next. By 4:39, the corridor had changed in subtle ways that official language never captured. Security had shifted 2 positions closer to pediatrics but kept hands off belts. The deputy, who had been finishing paperwork, now stood near the water fountain, pretending to read a bulletin board while watching the child in peripheral glances. Intake staff spoke in lower tones at the glass desk. Outside, engines idled in coordinated pockets that rose and dipped like breath. Inside, people started checking one another's eyes before making routine decisions, and that check alone was proof the old assumptions were losing ground. Todd walked back toward the supply room corner with the folded thermal blanket in one hand, boots leaving half-moon prints of rain that quickly dulled and disappeared. The girl watched him approach without moving her shoulders. Her shoes remained lined against the baseboard. Laces doubled. Cardboard inserts curled beside them like wet leaves. He crouched again, slower this time, and placed the blanket on the floor in front of her, not touching her coat, not reaching for the rabbit. "Can I put this around your feet?" he asked. She looked at the blanket, then at his face, then down the hall toward the locked elevator bay, where transfer teams usually appeared. Her voice came out thin but steady. "If I sleep, wake me." "I will." She lifted her feet an inch. He unfolded the metallic fabric, its surface crinkling loud in the corridor hush, and wrapped it loosely over her socks and ankles. Cold had reddened her toes through the damp knit, and he worked with the same patience he had once used, tying laces for a boy who insisted he was old enough to do it alone. The rabbit's one eye caught fluorescent glare and flashed like glass. The discovery had happened in seconds, but seconds can hold an entire verdict. First the shoes, aligned with care no institution had offered her. Then the rabbit hidden under coat, not displayed for comfort, concealed for survival. Then the face, composed beyond childhood, listening for doors instead of voices. His instincts had moved before interpretation. Basra taught him that. Prison reinforced it. You did not wait for complete paperwork when the pattern in front of you already matched danger. The van she named could have been legal. Legal did not mean safe. At 4:40, the automatic doors opened, and a gust brought in wet leather, gasoline, and the mineral smell of rain on concrete. 2 riders stood visible through the glass 20 yards away, helmets off now, hands at their sides, speaking to security with palms open and chins lifted to cameras. No one crossed thresholds. No one raised a voice. The discipline itself looked strange to people who expected spectacle. The girl leaned closer to the wall and tightened her hold on the rabbit's body, thumb smoothing the torn ear again and again in short strokes that never rose above chest level. She was still not crying. That was the thing adults around her would carry later and never fully explain to themselves. The absence of tears had stripped away the comfort of calling this a scene. It was not a scene. It was a child managing temperature, posture, and noise in a corridor built for throughput. Sandra returned with a paper cup and set it near the girl, then stepped back. "Warm water?" she said. "No meds in it." The girl waited until Sandra moved 2 full paces away, then reached and took the cup with both hands, careful not to spill. She drank 2 small swallows and passed it toward Todd without looking up. He set it on the floor by his boot. "You called?" Sandra asked him quietly. "Yes." "For who?" "People who show up." Her gaze flicked toward the windows, toward the accumulating row of bikes, toward the deputy pretending not to listen. "Then tell them hospital rules apply. They know." At 4:41, Todd rose from his crouch and stood beside the girl with one hand open at his thigh, not touching her unless asked, shoulder angled between her and the corridor bend where transport teams appeared. The engine note outside deepened by one register and settled there, steady enough to feel in the sternum. He did not smile, did not pace, did not perform reassurance. He simply stayed in position as rain worked the windows and the clock above the station clicked forward, red second hand jumping one precise mark at a time. The second hand above the pediatric station clicked to 4:42, and Mercy General kept moving in the old rhythm of clipped steps and closed charts. But Todd could feel the corridor trying to split in two, one version where a transfer form would be signed and a van would leave on schedule, and another where people would have to admit they had seen what they had stepped around. He stayed where he was, shoulder angled toward the elevator bay, while staff crossed behind him with lab envelopes and warm blankets and discharge folders. The girl watched the same bend in the hall as if she already knew where danger wore a badge and came carrying polite language. Sandra came back with a legal pad she had torn from the nurse desk, yellow pages bent at one corner, and stood near the wall clock to count with her own eyes instead of trusting memory. She wrote times in a narrow left column and initials in the right whenever someone passed within 5 feet of the child without stopping. She did not announce what she was doing. She did not need to. By 4:43, she had logged 9 additional passers in 2 minutes and 10 seconds. A respiratory therapist with a rattling med cart, an orthopedic rep with a rolling case of samples, an evening chaplain in a dark collar shirt, a dietary aide balancing sealed trays, a deputy from records returning to the first-floor desk, 2 visitors with sunflower stickers, a billing clerk from Window 6, and a volunteer in a knitted red vest carrying puzzle books for pediatrics. None of them were cruel. That was the point that cut deepest. They were ordinary, licensed, trained, church-going, tax-paying, badge-wearing people who had learned to trust process over sight. At 4:44, Sandra reconciled 3 earlier names from the pre-4:41 notes and checked with Colleen for exact times. Colleen retrieved the sticky note from under the apple paperweight and flattened it against the counter with both palms, as if smoothing paper might smooth responsibility. The note read 4:32, child seated by supply, social work flagged. Colleen swallowed once and gave Sandra the name she knew, Pastor Whitaker, who had prayed with a family in room 219, Deputy Fallon, who had signed release paperwork near intake, Mr. Lane from Northview Terrace, visiting his mother in telemetry, a man who lived 2 buildings down from the apartment listed on the child's triage sheet and had looked directly at the little coat on the floor before moving on. By 4:45, Sandra's running sheet showed 13 additional passers after the locked 4:41 baseline of 38, bringing the corridor total to 51, and she read the number under her breath like a dosage she did not trust. 51, a pastor, a deputy, a neighbor, 2 residents, a social worker ending shift, a cafeteria manager, 3 volunteers, clerks, transport, visitors with casseroles and flowers and good intentions for somebody else. Every one of them had enough information to pause. Every one of them kept a lane. Todd listened without turning his head, the way he had listened in war and in lockup when hearing mattered more than speaking, and the number settled into him like added weight. The building had not failed once. It had failed repeatedly, in small legal ways that stacked into a wall. Rain struck the long window in harder sheets, and the engine note outside thickened in patient layers, rising and falling as riders rotated positions along legal curb and side streets. Security still stood at both pediatric doors, now less rigid, hands visible, radios low. Through the glass, men in wet cuts waited without crossing lines painted on concrete. Inside, the girl shifted one foot from under the thermal blanket, then tucked it back when the cold bit through the sock. Her shoes stayed lined against the baseboard, laces in careful double knots, cardboard insoles curled beside them like softened bark. She looked at those shoes once, then at Todd's open hand, then back to the hall bend where transfer teams appeared. At 4:46, a woman in a county fleece jacket came around the corner with a ring of keys in a hard-shell folder, stamped Child Placement Intake, Franklin County. She slowed when she saw Todd, standing with his vest and scar and steady stance, slowed again when she saw Sandra's yellow legal pad and the deputy now watching openly from the fountain. She did not approach the child. She stepped to the desk and asked for the social worker, in a voice so procedural it seemed practiced against resistance. Todd heard every word and kept still. The woman signed the visitor log, checked her watch, and said, "Transport was scheduled at 5:10 pending release packet completion." Sandra wrote that line down, too. The corridor air changed again when the automatic doors opened, bringing in wet leather, rainwater, and the iron smell of cooling engines. Todd knelt so his eyes were level with the child's and waited long enough for her to choose whether to speak. Her face stayed controlled, but her fingers had started working the torn ear of the rabbit in small, repeated strokes, smoothing and folding, as if the cloth could be made whole by persistence. A hospital bracelet peeked from her sleeve when she adjusted her grip. Lily H., Dobb, July 14th, printed in smudged black. He kept his voice low. "You know your name, kid?" She nodded once. "Want me to use it?" Another nod, smaller. "Lily," he said, and the name landed gently in the fluorescent cold. "I'm right here." For the first time since he had approached, she looked straight at him and held it. Her pupils were wide in the bright hall, a child's eyes carrying too much calculation. She leaned forward just enough that her words would not travel past him, and when she spoke, it came as a whisper worn thin by hours of not being heard. "If they call me," she whispered, "hold my hand so I don't have to go." It was short, exact, and heavier than any formal request in the building. Todd did not answer with comfort language or promises too wide to keep. He sat back on his heel and opened his right hand between them. Palm up, fingers scarred and square from concrete work. A hand that had broken things and built things and signed too many forms. Lily looked at it for 2 breaths, then set her small hand in the center of it. Rabbit trapped between her elbow and coat zipper. Her hand was cold and dry. She did not squeeze. She just stayed. By 4:48, the county woman with the hard-shell folder approached with a discharge coordinator and stopped 3 paces away. "Mr. Lewis," the coordinator said, reading his name from intake notes, "we need to complete transfer steps with county placement." Todd did not stand. "She asked me to stay." The county woman glanced at the deputy, then at security, then at Sandra's yellow pad where times and names covered half a page. "You are not guardian," she said. "No," Todd said. "I'm witness." The word settled in the corridor like a marker dropped on a map. The coordinator asked for social work. Social work asked for administration. Administration asked risk for guidance and began speaking in language of liability and temporary hold review. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody touched Lily. The county folder stayed closed. At 4:49, Lily's thumb pressed once against Todd's palm, a signal so small it might have been missed by anyone not paying full attention. He leaned closer. She did not look at him when she spoke again. "The van has no windows in back," she whispered. He felt his spine lock the way it used to when mortar tubes coughed in the dark and the body recognized pattern before the mind finished naming it. He kept his face level, voice even. "You're not getting in it tonight," she shook her head once. "Don't let them put me where I can't see. Then we stay where you can see." She gave no sign of relief. She only adjusted the rabbit under her coat and kept one finger hooked over his index knuckle, as if anchoring herself to something that could be measured. The deputy near the fountain stepped closer and asked the county woman whether any court order compelled immediate transport. She said no, only scheduled transfer authorization. Sandra added that line to the pad and wrote the time. 4:50. Colleen, still at the desk, pulled a binder of policy tabs with faded labels and flipped to emergency hold procedure while rain ticked against glass and engines idled beyond it, like distant weather waiting for a signal. Todd looked once toward the window and saw a familiar helmet tilt on the far curb, then straighten. Road captain position. No theatrics. Just attention. He eased his hand from Lily's long enough to point at her shoes. "Want those on?" She nodded and lifted one foot. He dried her sock with the corner of the thermal blanket as best he could, slid the shoe on, then the other, and retied both double knots exactly as they had been, loops even, ends tucked. The cardboard insoles could not be salvaged. He set them beside the trash can and noticed Lily watching, so he picked them back up and folded them into his vest pocket instead of discarding them because children noticed what adults threw away. She saw that and rested her shoulders against the wall for the first time. By 4:52, the pediatric corridor had become a narrow civic courtroom without a judge. County intake, hospital administration, deputy, nurse, clerk, one biker on one knee beside one child. 16 additional passers beyond the 38 baseline, 54 overall, with names for 41 of them and roles for all. Sandra read the running total quietly to the charge nurse, and the charge nurse did not argue the number. The indictment was arithmetic, not rhetoric. The system had relied on momentum. Momentum had finally met resistance. Todd stood slowly, knees clicking, and moved to the window at the end of the corridor where exterior lights threw yellow on rain. He did not open the door. He did not speak into a phone. He raised his right hand chest high, 2 fingers extended, then turned the hand flat and drew one deliberate line downward toward the pavement, the old road signal for hold position and split assignment. Through the rain-slick glass, 3 riders saw it in sequence and relayed it without motion, bigger than a nod. One stepped to his bike and tapped his own bars twice. Another looked south toward county intake and touched his helmet brim. The third checked his watch and held up one open palm to indicate 5 minutes to shift. Todd lowered his hand and went back to Lily before anyone could call it performance. He resumed position beside her, open palm available, eyes on the corridor bend. The call had been made in plain sight and in silence. What it would bring had not arrived yet. Outside, the rumble changed key. Dropping from a loose street noise into a single low register that held steady long enough for people inside Mercy General to stop calling it traffic and start calling it presence. The floor carried it first. Todd felt it through the balls of his feet and up the healed fractures in his right hand where Lily's fingers rested. A stack of specimen cups on the counter gave a thin plastic rattle in rhythm with idling engines, then settled, then rattled again as another wave turned onto the frontage road in disciplined spacing. No one in the corridor spoke for several seconds. Sound did the speaking. It came through rain-struck glass, through cinder block, through the aluminum frame of the pediatric doors, and into sternum and throat as pressure more than volume. A mechanical pulse that made the fluorescent hum feel small. Lily lifted her chin and listened with the same careful stillness she had used all afternoon. She did not flinch. She tracked direction, At 4:53, Security Officer Jensen pressed his earpiece and stared at the exterior feed monitor, where camera angles kept filling with helmets, taillights, and rain-dark denim. "They're staging legal curb only," he said to no one in particular. "No lane obstruction." He sounded surprised by his own report. The deputy by the fountain stepped closer, took one look at the monitor, and began writing plate clusters in his pocket notebook without being asked. Todd kept his hand open for Lily and watched the county caseworker at the desk shift her hard shell folder from left arm to right, then back again. She had started this hour with procedural certainty. Now she had the look of someone counting variables she could not place on a form. Sandra's yellow legal pad lay on the station ledge with times and names stacked in tight columns. 54 passers and rising. Colleen added 2 more entries from memory and drew a line beneath the previous total with a ballpoint that skipped on damp paper. By 4:55, the first blocks around Mercy had become a map of controlled positions. Riders filled spaces where city parking lines allowed them. 2 tires to a slot where striping was wide, 1 bike per meter where it was not, engines idling only in rotating pairs, while others shut down to cut noise near the ambulance bay. Wet leather steamed faintly under street lamps. Gloves came off, then went back on. Heads turned together when dispatch sirens crossed in the distance, then turned back to the doors. Todd's flip phone vibrated once against his vest. He checked the screen and saw a text from Mace, all capitals, no extra words. "Hold confirmed. Count pending." He put the phone away and faced Lily again. Her thumb had found the scar line near his knuckle and rested there, not pressing, just marking a fixed point. She whispered, "Are they mad?" "No," he said. "They're here to witness." She looked at the corridor bend where transfer teams came from and asked nothing else. The rain increased, fat drops slapping the long windows in irregular bursts, and each automatic door cycle brought in cold air with gasoline, damp wool, and the metallic scent of hot engines cooling too fast. At 4:57, Sandra moved to the child placement desk with her legal pad and requested a written notation of pending transfer authority. Verbal only, no court order attached. The county worker resisted for 1 beat, then handed over the top sheet from her folder for copying. Sandra wrote the time beside it. Her hand shook once when she capped her pen. She steadied it against the counter and kept going. Across the hall, the deputy asked quietly, "Any threats reported?" Jensen shook his head. "None. They keep asking where they can stand without blocking care." The deputy nodded as if that data had weight. "Keep recording." At 4:59, the rumble deepened again, not louder, denser, the way storm thunder rolls longer when another front stacks behind it. It pressed against the glass and entered bone. In the pediatrics waiting alcove, a mother with a sleeping toddler pulled the child closer and watched the windows with fear she did not conceal, then watched a rider in the lot step aside to clear a stretcher path before an EMT even reached the curb. Her grip eased. She kept watching. Todd turned his head toward the end window and saw the movement pattern lock into final form. Southbound stream thinning, eastbound stream thickening, northbound hold line splitting on signal. Road work, not posturing. He had seen formations like that under different flags and in harsher weather. They meant commitment and clock discipline. At 5:01, his phone vibrated again. Same line, same brevity. South team set. Intake covered. That meant the second location had its wall beginning 2 miles south at Franklin County Child Placement Intake, where paperwork usually outran people. The county worker at Mercy got a call at almost the same second, answered, listened, and went pale around the mouth. "You have to be kidding," she said, then corrected herself when she saw the deputy watching. "Understood. Keep entrances clear. She ended the call and pressed both hands flat on her folder to still them. Todd asked, "Intake?" She gave a tight nod. "Sidewalk is full." "How full?" She hesitated, then said, "More than I've ever seen." At 5:03, the exterior cameras showed another flow turning off Salem toward McCrary Pawn and Lone, chrome and black under yellow streetlights, moving in pairs, no horns, no rev blasts, no lane cutting. Raymond McCrary appeared briefly in one feed at his doorway, green visor gone, palms up while two riders pointed to posted hours and stepped back to the curb with visible hands. The camera had no sound, but the body language read clear. Transaction. Witnesses. Policy observed. Inside Mercy, the child placement coordinator asked administration for immediate conference review. Administration asked risk. Risk asked for document grounds to pause transfer. Sandra placed her yellow pad on the counter between them and tapped the total with her forefinger. "Grounds," she said. "Observed abandonment in a medical corridor with time-stamped witnesses." Her tone stayed clinical. It carried farther than raised voices. By 5:05, the corridor clock clicked, and the building seemed to hold a collective breath. Engines outside fell, then rose in one synchronized sweep as a final wave came around the bend beyond the diner and cut lights to parking mode on command. Todd's chest recognized the cadence first. Then the radio on Jensen's shoulder cracked with a dispatch relay from city traffic. "Motorcycle assembly count requested by hospital admin. Preliminary total incoming." Jensen repeated it aloud because everyone near him was listening anyway. The reply came 21 seconds later, flat and official. 550 confirmed citywide associated with Mercy event. Repeat, 550. The number landed with ceremonial clarity. At 5:06, Mace's text arrived and matched the radio exactly. 550, 200 Mercy, 150 intake, 200 Emma Creary. Todd read it once and locked the phone. He did not smile. He bent to Lily so she could hear him without strain. 550 showed up, he said. She blinked, trying to fit the figure into a hallway where numbers were usually room assignments and dosage units. "For me?" "For you," he said. "And for what's right." She looked toward the rain-streaked window as if she might see every one of them through concrete and glass. Her mouth set in that same disciplined line, but her shoulders dropped half an inch, the first release Todd had seen in her all day. The wall began as logistics. At 5:07, two riders in rain capes and plain black helmets entered the main lobby unarmed, signed visitor logs with legal names, accepted temporary badges, and asked security where they could stand without interfering with patient movement. They were sent to the far side of pediatrics' doors and complied exactly. Backs to the wall, hands visible, eyes on corridor traffic. 3 more did the same at the second entrance. Another 2 stood at Radiology Junction, where transfer teams usually cut through to shorten route. They did not block passage. They created witness points. The deputy requested a rolling sign-in sheet for all county transport personnel entering pediatrics after 5:08. Colleen printed one, time-stamped each line, and set it on a clipboard under the Apple paperweight. Sandra attached her legal pad pages with a binder clip and labeled the packet "Observation Log" in block letters. Jensen started body cam recording at his own discretion and announced it out loud for the room. Procedure began catching up to reality. At 5:09, the scheduled transfer van turned into Mercy's service lane. White bodywork wet under sodium lights, county seal dark with rain on the side panel. It stopped at the designated curb and idled. 2 transport staff stepped out in fleece jackets, clipboards under clear plastic sleeves, They made it 10 feet toward the door, saw the line of vested men positioned along legal boundaries with security present, and slowed. No one approached them aggressively. No one touched them. One rider pointed silently to the sign-in table just inside and then stepped back to his mark. Todd kept his attention on Lily. "You can still see," he said quietly. She nodded. "I can see." The transport pair entered, signed names and times, and were met by administration, the deputy, and the county worker from upstairs. The conversation happened in low, clipped sentences near the station desk, while the corridor remained passable for staff and families. Terms moved fast. Temporary hold review, immediate safety objection, pending judicial contact, no court-compelled removal order in hand. The transport supervisor asked whether refusal was being documented. Sandra slid the packet across. "Documented since 4:32, she said. By 5:11, confirmation came from the South team. Intake sidewalk secured by 150 riders, entry clear for employees, advocate line active on speakerphone in the lobby, county supervisor present on site. The call ran through the deputy's phone on speaker, so everyone in earshot heard the same facts at once. A veteran services attorney in Columbus took the line, requested names, and asked whether the child had a named bedside witness willing to sign an affidavit of observed fear statement. Todd said, "I'll sign." The deputy handed him a pen without comment. He printed Todd Lewis in large, uneven block letters on the first form, then signed again on the second, where Sandra indicated, then initialed the margin where Lily's statement was quoted exactly. "Please don't let them send me back in the van." If there was power in the hallway now, it came from documentation and numbers aligned, not from noise. At 5:13, another message reached Jensen through traffic control and was relayed to administration. McCreary pawn and loan transaction complete. Metal item paid and removed from window before close. Receipt verified by 2 independent witnesses. No incident. Todd heard that line and felt something unclench in his jaw that he had been carrying since 4:24. He did not turn away from Lily to process it. One burden offloaded did not change the one in front of him. The corridor wall tightened into final shape. 6 riders at interior witness points, 12 at each exterior pediatric entrance, rotating for warmth, security and deputy, centered at desk, county transport held in the waiting status, administration on call with risk, and after-hours judge clerk. The van remained at curb, engine off now, drivers seated with paperwork on the wheel. Rain ran down the windshield in silver threads under lot lights. At 5:15, Lily shifted in her chair and carefully lifted the rabbit so its one eye faced outward, no longer hidden in her coat. Todd noticed and moved his hand closer, palm up. She set her fingers into it again, colder now but steadier. No one crossed the line around her without being seen, named, and written down. At 5:16, the charge nurse brought a plastic chair from triage and set it beside the wall so Lily did not have to stay on the floor, and Todd lifted her by the elbows only after she nodded, careful not to dislodge the rabbit tucked in her coat. She sat with both shoes planted, laces still in the double knots he had tied, thermal blanket over her knees, one hand in his. The other hand held the rabbit at its neck where old stitching had gone thin. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and rain and coffee burnt down to bitterness, and the bent wheel on a supply cart kept clicking past every few minutes, one dry tick per rotation, ordinary noise refusing to leave, just because the stakes had become visible. At 5:19, Colleen brought the sticky note from under the Apple paperweight and placed it on top of Sandra's log packet, flattening both with her palm so the timestamps lined up in sequence. "I should have escalated sooner," she said, voice level, looking at Sandra and not at Todd. Sandra clipped the sticky note to the front with a blue binder clip and wrote, received 1719 beside it. The county caseworker watched, then opened her hard folder and added her own transport sheet behind the packet without being asked. The loaded look she had carried since the first phone call settled into plain language at last. "No court order," she said to the deputy. "Scheduled transfer only. I documented concern and kept moving. That's on me." The deputy wrote her statement, read it back, and she signed. By 5:24, the Veteran Services attorney was back on speaker, requesting a direct line to the after-hours judge clerk and confirming the affidavit language word for word. Todd listened as Sandra read Lily's whisper exactly as written, no edits for comfort, then watched the attorney dictate filing steps to administration in clipped legal terms: emergency safety hold request, immediate review, named monitor assignment, no unwindowed transport pending hearing. Risk management stopped speaking in abstractions and began entering names. Jensen's body cam timecode was logged onto the same sheet. The first two riders at interior post rotated out for warmth and two others rotated in, signing the visitor ledger with the same careful print and standing where security placed them. Nothing theatrical happened. Procedure finally did. At 5:31, Todd felt Lily's fingers shift against his palm and looked down. She was staring at his vest pocket, where the folded cardboard insoles made a soft rectangle under wet leather. He understood and took them out, now creased and drying at the edges, the pencil marks still visible where someone had traced her foot months earlier. "These yours," he said. She nodded. He did not put them back in her shoes. He asked Sandra for a specimen bag, and she returned with one from pediatrics. Label blank, seal intact. Todd slid both insoles in, pressed out the air, and handed the bag to Colleen, who wrote Lily H. Personal Effects, 1733, and signed with initials that did not shake. She placed it in the belongings envelope with Lily's intake bracelet printout and a clean pair of children's socks. The object had been seen, kept, and named. At 5:40, while rain hammered the service lane awning in a hard diagonal, a gray-bearded rider entered from the main lobby, carrying a plain brown paper bag folded twice at the top. He signed the log as Daniel Pike removed his gloves and approached only when Jensen nodded. He stopped at Todd's shoulder and held out the bag. "From McCreary," he said. "Clothes clean." Todd opened it enough to see the blue ribbon first, then the metal wrapped in receipt paper, then the pawn ticket stamped paid in purple ink with a timestamp of 5:13 p.m. and transaction reversal code beneath. His reclaim slip from earlier had been hole-punched void at the counter and returned with it. Todd refolded the bag and kept it on his lap, hand resting over the crease like he was steadying a pulse. Daniel Pike gave one short nod, signed out, and went back to exterior post without another word. At 5:52, the county transport van shut down and moved from active curb to visitor overflow under instruction from administration pending judicial review. The two transport staff signed deferment lines on Colleen's clipboard, noted no physical handoff completed, and departed on foot to the waiting room for callback. The deputy took a photo of the signed sheet for records, then printed a copy for county intake. Across town, the South team reported by text that Franklin County Child Placement Intake remained open, sidewalk clear for staff ingress, and witness presence stable at 150 with no citations. Mace's final message to Todd came at 5:58. All positions holding. Judge line live. Todd typed one response with his thumb and closed the phone. Copy. By 6:02, darkness had fully set beyond the long windows, and Mercy General's fluorescent interior began to feel like a separate climate from the storm, bright and overexposed. every face edged in pallor. The vending alcove still flashed, out of order beside the machine that still hissed. And the July 14th maintenance ticket remained on the corkboard with corners yellowed and curling. Colleen looked at it once while waiting for the callback, then tore a clean requisition form from the pad and rewrote the request in block letters with tonight's date and her initials, pinning it over the old one. She did not comment. She returned to the desk and resumed logging arrivals and departures, each time written, none waved through. At 6:17, the judge clerk called back on a secure line and requested immediate remote hearing from Conference Room B, second floor, because the docket was full and weather had delayed in-person review. Administration asked who would attend. The answer was precise: one hospital representative, county caseworker, deputy witness, bedside witness, and nursing observer. Todd looked at Lily before standing. "I have to walk upstairs for a few minutes," he said. "Sandra stays with you." Lily held his wrist, then released it and placed the rabbit in his lap. For 1 second, a pledge and a demand. He handed it back carefully. "I'm coming right back." She watched his face, then nodded once and pulled the rabbit to her chest. Conference Room B smelled like dry marker and old carpet adhesive, with a water stain above the projector shaped like a blunt peninsula. At 6:29, the screen lit with the judge's remote feed, county seal in one corner. Questions came crisp. Was there any court order compelling immediate transport? No. Had the child made a fear statement regarding current transfer method? Yes, documented and witnessed. Had hospital staff observed prolonged period without guardian present? Yes, with timestamps beginning 4:12 and confirmed at 4:32 and continuing. Was there a named adult monitor available for overnight supervised crisis placement? Yes, Sandra Briggs, RN, volunteered and was approved by administration. The county caseworker answered without hedging when asked if she supported temporary hold pending morning review. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "I do." 3 days of rain had swollen the river by then, and by 7:38 on that same Thursday night, the signed protective hold order arrived by fax and encrypted email within 90 seconds of each other, pages warm from the machine, black seal clear, transport barred until review. Colleen stamped, received 1938 in red, and clipped the order to the front of the packet that now contained Sandra's log, the sticky note, deputy statements, transport deferment signatures, and Todd's affidavit. The external calls had outcomes. The paperwork matched the hallway. County intake acknowledged receipt at 7:44 and reassigned Lily to supervised crisis care at Mercy overnight with the named monitor on record. Todd came back down to pediatrics with the paper bag in one hand and the copy of the order in the other. Lily was still in the plastic chair, shoes on, blanket tucked, rabbit upright in her lap, as if waiting for inspection. Sandra stood behind her with one hand on the chair back, posture tired and unwavering. The riders at interior post remained at their marks, now reduced to 4 as shifts rotated outward, and engines cooled in intervals. Through the glass, lines of bikes were still visible in rain-silvered rows, less a show of force than a held promise measured in patience. Todd knelt and set the brown paper bag on the chair beside Lily. He unfolded the top and showed her the medal's blue ribbon before he showed her the medal. "Got it back before close," he said. "Paid in full." She touched the ribbon with 2 fingers, then looked up for permission he did not need to give. He placed it in her hands anyway. She studied the color as if memorizing it, then looped the ribbon around the rabbit's neck and tied a careful double knot, the same knot from her shoes, small fingers working slowly until both loops matched and the rabbit sat with one missing eye, and a soldier's blue ribbon resting against worn cloth. Todd opened his hand beside hers on the chair seat, palm up, scarred and still. Lily set her hand in it without looking away from the knot she had made, and for the first time that day she leaned her shoulder lightly against his sleeve and stayed there, while rain moved down the windows and the clock above the station clicked forward in red jumps. Sometimes the system people trust most arrives only after witnesses force it to see what was in front of it all along. Sometimes the people written off as dangerous are the ones who stand still long enough for a child to believe she will be allowed to remain in sight.